Here's where we are. We are in Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to be looking at verse 15 through 21. I want you to start right at verse 15. Look carefully at how you walk. This is the fifth and final time that Paul mentions walking in Ephesians. Each time he's talking about how to live. And here what he says is walk carefully. So I want you to think about this first of all. How much care, thoughtfulness, attention, intentionality, discipline, how much care are you putting into your spiritual journey? All right? And then he continues, walk carefully, not as unwise, but as wise. In other words, this passage is actually teaching us how to be wise. That's really the title of today's message. How to make your life count. How to make your life matter. How not to waste your life. Okay? And what follows, this is really interesting. It looks like random instructions. When I started reading this passage this week, literally last Monday, I wrote in my journal, I'm like, Lord, what's there to even preach on in here? And I'm like, should I just skip this chunk? And every day, as I'm like, I'm seeing some things, I'm writing notes. By the end of the week, yesterday morning, I'm like, Lord, I have too much to say out of this passage. So here's what I want to kind of try to break it down. It looks like random instructions, but I think there's actually some structure to it. So I'm going to give you 3 points. First of all, 3 things to focus on. Okay, and each one of those things is built around a juxtaposition. Okay, second thing, 3 strategies to actually help. They're actually really simple and practical. Thirdly, 1 thing that you should never forget. Actually, maybe 2. It has to do with Jesus and the church. Okay, so this is our outline. 3 things to focus on. I'll give you those. 3 strategies to help. I'll give you those. 1 or 2 things not to forget. Have to do with Jesus and the church. The one thing I want to say is this is a great passage to practice meditating on, because there's actually nothing inherently hard or controversial here. The difficulty is not in understanding the passage. The difficulty is actually in how do I apply this? How do I work this into the weave of my life on a regular basis? Because it's very easy to forget these things. Okay, so let's start with this. Number 1, 3 areas of focus. You're going to see this in verse 16, 17, and 18. Here are the 3 things. Number 1, time. Number 2, purpose. Number 3, fuel. Catch that? Time, purpose, fuel. These are really big things. And what's interesting is each one of these things, when it's laid out, actually has a juxtaposition in it. In other words, there's kind of, he's setting it up against something. He's saying, there's this, but like do this. All right, so let's look at the first one and I'll show you what I mean. If you look at verse 16, okay, focus on time, how you think about time. Verse 16, make the best use of time, or make every opportunity. Take advantage of every opportunity because the days are evil. Now listen, how do you make bad use of time? You waste it, okay? But there's interesting, you can actually waste time, what's the most obvious way? By being idle, okay? Not doing anything. But do you know how else you can waste time? You can be really busy with the wrong things, okay? Paul seems to be saying we actually need to make really good use of our time. And if you say, why? Here's the juxtaposition part. He's like, because the days are evil. Think about this. Most of us tend to think, I actually want to enjoy my time, and the days should be good. Okay? In other words, I want the days to be good. I want them not to be evil, because what I really want to do is kind of enjoy my time. Like, I'd like to have a nice, luxurious life where I could fish about 3 months out of the year. Okay, I'm still hoping for that. But the point is, it's probably not the best use of my time. Okay, what we want and what we expect, all right, I want to be able to enjoy my time. I want the days to be good. We are constantly surprised and shocked when, guess what, things don't go well. Things aren't good. The world is a dark place. Life doesn't unfold like this. And I think what he's saying is, part of the problem is that we kind of have this expectation that life should be good so I can enjoy my time. And what if we started the other way around? In other words, if we really assumed the days are evil, my time is limited, it's short, so I need to make the most of what I have. And that means I'm going to work for food that endures. Do you know who says that? Jesus, in John chapter 6, verse 27. I'm going to work for food that endures. I am going to appreciate it when times are good. Okay? But I'm not going to take it for granted, because I understand that times overall are evil, so I'm going to adjust my working, my thinking, my aims, my efforts accordingly. Do you hear that? There's kind of a sense of urgency there to this world right now, because you don't have much time. And Paul is saying, if you do that, it's not just going to impact your schedule, but you're actually going to become more thoughtful, more deliberate, more intentional. You're going to become a wise person, because you're really focused on this time that you have. You know the days are evil. You know the time is short. So you're like, I need to actually make the best use of the time that I have. Instead of being controlled by your schedule, a victim of busyness, how many of us relate? Okay? You'll start to take control of your schedule. You'll start to be wise about the times and wise about your time. Now listen, what are we doing right now? We're meditating on the text. We're just thinking through the structure that's there. One of the things I've observed that I'm becoming an expert in, getting older, okay, is as you get older, you start to discover that time goes by more quickly. It accelerates. Decades fly by, especially when you're deliberate, focused, and busy. You're actually doing stuff. It's like, it goes quickly. There is a lot that you want to do and accomplish, and it never goes according to plan. It is very easy to get anxious. For instance, let's say you want to be married. Let's say you want to have kids. Let's say you want to have a better job. Now, someone who is wise reads the time and goes, hey, if those are the things that I'd like to accomplish, I probably ought to get started on it. I probably ought to not waste my time chasing things or chasing people that maybe I'm not going to want to go through life with or have kids with. You see what I'm saying? It starts to change how you're going to date. Starts to change how you're going to live. Starts to think about well, what do I want to do for my work? Am I just trying to make money, or am I trying to accomplish something? Okay, the point is, if you start to do this, you're not going to want to waste your time, but you're also going to know, hopefully, that God's in control of this. So here's what happens. You become much more urgent, but also much more relaxed. You're very, very deliberate, focused, intentional, but you also know that the world is evil and things don't go according to plan. But God's in control, and therefore, no matter what happens, I can trust Him with it, including relationships, including work, including whether or not I have kids, including my health. All right, all of these things, deliberate, focused, intentional, but relaxed. What Paul is saying is that is one of the biggest things that you need to focus on, is how you view time. Most people think, I've got endless amount of time. No, you don't. Okay, and we're not very focused, and we're not very deliberate, or we are those things and we're anxious. And Paul is saying we're looking for this thing, we're very, very engaged, but we're also very relaxed. And that is a really unique way of, like, you will move through time in a much better way if you do that. Okay, so that's the first one. That would be 1.1, things to focus on. 1.2, first one's time, second one is purpose. Look at verse 17. He says, don't be foolish, okay? Understand what the Lord or what the will of the Lord is. Do you hear the juxtaposition again? Foolish, will of the Lord. A fool oftentimes says, there is no will of the Lord. God doesn't really care what I do with my time. Okay? God doesn't really care what I do in this life. Or a fool reduces the will of the Lord to something simple and mechanistic, like a list of commandments or be a good person. How many of us know people that that's their view of what God's will is? He just wants you to be happy. He just wants you to, like, not be a murderer. He does want you to not be a murderer, okay? That will help your parenting if you're not a murderer, theoretically. But the point is, God wants so much more for you than that, all right? So we're talking about purpose here. In other words, the wise person says, God built me. God placed me here in this life, in this place, in this country, in this family. So, like, you look in your family and you're like, my family's a mess. Guess what? God put you there. And He did it for a reason. Everything that has ever happened to me, this is what I think a wise person says, everything, good, bad, or otherwise, God did it. God allowed it. He must have a reason. There is a purpose and plan to my life. God has something for me to learn. God has something for me to try. God has something for me to attempt. God has something for me to do. God has something for me to believe. God has a way for me to, like, try to live by faith. Do you hear the purpose language there? Some people don't believe this, okay? They are leery of talking about God like having any kind of specific purpose or plan for your life. But I want to show you something. Number one, that kind of language, purpose, plan language, all over the Psalms. Okay? And before we go, oh, well, that's about David and Jesus. Yeah, it is. But what makes you think God has a purpose for David and Jesus and not for you? That's a big leap of faith. Okay? Second, I'm going to give you even more evidence in the Psalms. Remember John the Baptist? Luke chapter 3. There's religious people coming to get baptized, and he's like, who warned you to flee the coming wrath? Brood of vipers. He's talking to the Pharisees. But the crowd actually says, he says this, produce fruit in keeping with repentance. In other words, they're like, I'm having this spiritual renewal project, right? John the Baptist is in town. I'm going to get on board with this spiritual renewal thing. So I go down to do the spiritual renewal thing. I'm going to get dunked in water. It's easy. It doesn't take very long. But, you know, it's like going to Coachella, but it's a spiritual version of it. Okay? So I go do this thing. And John goes, wait just a second. It's not just the thing. You need to bear fruit in keeping with the thing. And then the crowd says, what must we do? And do you remember what he says? He says, if you have 2 tunics, share one with whoever doesn't have a tunic. If you have extra food, share it with anybody who's hungry. Okay? And then he goes, tax collectors. All right? Collect no more than what you're authorized to collect. Okay? He's talking about fair. So he's talking about compassion, talking about fairness. Okay? Talking about justice. Where does tax collector stuff happen? Well, workplace. They come around and they're like, how much money did you make? Okay, we need a chunk of it. All right? Where does crowd stuff happen? You know, tunics and food. Neighbors. People in you're driving to work. Okay? He talks to soldiers. He says, don't extort money. Okay? Don't make threats. Don't make false accusations. Be content with your wages. He's talking about integrity. Okay, now listen, here's my point. All of those things, this spiritual renewal project, it has to do with like, you have a purpose in this world to become a new and different kind of person, and it starts playing out with all the people around you. Plays out in your workplace, plays out in your home, plays out with your neighbors, plays out when nobody's looking. But the point is, John is saying the purpose of baptism is not just to have a spiritual renewal, it's to become a different kind of person in the here and now. You have a purpose. God has put you here for a reason. We may not understand it. In fact, you're never going to fully understand it. But that doesn't mean there's not a purpose and there's not a plan and we can't seek to understand it. Okay? In other words, your repentance, your coming to God, your relationship with Him is meant to produce something in you, fruit. Okay? And that impacts with how you interact with every single being, human being, life. You see how practical this is? Super, super practical. Okay, many people think that God doesn't have a will for them, or if it does, it's very generic. Believe in Jesus, be a good person, so that when you die, you'll go to heaven. And I think what Paul is saying is a wise person says, number one, what are the times like? How much time do I have? I need to make really good use of it. Number two, if I'm going to make good use of my time, I need to understand my purpose. I need to understand why He's put me here. Why am I on this earth? Is it just to consume things? You know, take up space? Be like bugs? Or is it like, no, we are actually here to seek the welfare of others, to love our enemies. You ever heard this? Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Seek the shalom of the city. A wise man says, Lord, why am I here? What do you want me to do? Purpose. Okay. Now what are we doing? Meditating on the text. Okay. So those are the first two things. Time, purpose. Here's the third thing. Fuel. Look at verse 18. Don't be drunk on wine. That is debauchery. Okay, this is where translations are helpful, but some say that leads to debauchery. There's a juxtaposition. Don't be drunk on wine, leads to debauchery. Instead, here's the second side of it, be filled with the Spirit. I think he's talking about fuel. Now, here's what I mean. Why do I think that? Okay, how do you recharge after a hard day at work? You come home, you open the refrigerator, and you reach for a beer. Or you pour yourself a glass of wine. Okay? Or you binge watch something on Netflix while you eat comfort food. You know what I'm saying? Okay, listen. In other words, if you ask the question, what are your escape strategies? It might be shopping. It might be sex. It might be weed. It might be Netflix. Okay? There's a whole bunch of things. But for most people, our escape strategies almost always involve indulging. I'm going to give myself something that makes me feel good. Okay? The text is not saying that wine is bad, by the way. This is really important. You would be able to read this, or you might be able to read this. And I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going to change my batteries before they die. Okay? So you're going to lose me for just a second on that. I'm back. There we go. Okay. So for most people, our escape strategies involve some kind of indulgence, something that makes us feel good. The text is not saying that any of these things, wine's not bad, sex is not bad, okay? Psalm 104, verses 14 and 15, talks about God giving bread to strengthen man, and He gives us oil, okay? And He gives us wine to gladden men's hearts. Hear that? That's a gift. So the problem, debauchery, which is this word, it doesn't actually mean like, oh, you're doing bad things. What debauchery actually means, it's overindulgence in good things. Okay? Too much of a good thing is a bad thing. It leads to drunkenness. It leads to addiction. It leads to bad choices. Okay? It leads to regret. It leads to consequence. And what he's really getting at here, I think, there is an addictive quality to indulgence. The good things, which are gifts of God, meant to be used in a certain way, but they're not ultimate things. They can never truly refuel us. Okay? And as a result, they always disappoint us. They don't give us what we hope. So it leaves us longing for more. And what happens is we tend to go deeper, and before we know it, this thing has actually become an idol for us that leads us into darkness and leads us into bondage. And what he's saying is, don't seek these things to fuel your life or refuel your life when you're tired, when you're down. He's not saying that they're bad. He's not saying that you can't come home and have a beer or a glass of wine. But he's saying we've got to understand these things are not going to fill us up and refuel us the way we... So what is? And the answer is the Spirit. Okay? Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Now you go, what does that mean? And I just want to say, at a minimum, Paul is saying that God's Spirit actually can fill you, can recharge you in a way that none of these other things actually can. Escape mechanisms, like when I go fishing, that's a little bit of an escape mechanism. It's a vacation. But I know that that is not going to like get me through the rest of it. Like, the gospel is what gets me through the rest of the year. The Spirit is what gets me through the rest of the year. And what that does is that means I can enjoy fishing and have a vacation, but I'm not like heaping some kind, I've got to get enough fishing in that I can somehow like fill my tank to get, I'm not looking for fishing to do that. And as a result, I can just enjoy it. Okay. God's Spirit actually can fill us, and this should lead us to ask, number one, am I actually looking and seeking to be filled by the Spirit, or am I seeking to fill the bucket of my soul by dipping it in other wells? And am I wondering why I don't feel full and why I don't feel, it's not working? And most of us are like, I guess I need a different well. And we keep going to these things, and we're actually in bondage. Now, a wise man is going to start thinking about that. And then a wise man is going to say, well, how do I actually get the Spirit? And I think a wise man is going to say, oh, wait, Nicodemus, John chapter 3. He recognized you can't manufacture this. Okay? But then he's also going to think, but the woman at the well in John chapter 4. Remember what she said? Sir, give me this water. And Jesus did. In other words, you can't manufacture it, but you can desire it and you can ask for it. Okay? This passage shows you, I think, right after this, some really practical instructions about how to pursue this. So these are the three things you got to focus on. What's your view of time? Okay? What's your view of purpose? Like, are you really about your purpose or God's purpose? Okay, 3, where are you looking to fuel yourself? Seeking to get fuel from money? Seeking to get fuel from relationships? Seeking to get fuel from success at work? Seeking to get fuel from, partying? None of those are going to work. You're seeking to get fuel from the Holy Spirit. Those 3 things. Okay, now we move into the second point. 3 practical strategies. Guess what? This is verse 19, 20, and 21. And these are going to be much faster. The 3 strategies: sing, give thanks, submit. Okay. Look at verse 19. Addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart. Number 1, do you see how that just kind of continues right from the previous sentence? It's not like a new sentence starts there. He's actually going, be filled with the Spirit, comma, and then he goes right into this. Do you see how it's connected? Okay, here's a question. What's the song of your heart? What are the melodies that you sing to yourself internally? What narratives are you telling yourself? What's the background music behind your life? Okay? Now listen, what's really interesting is that the music you actually listen to is somehow connected to the music that's on play in your heart. That's what he's saying here. Now, I want to be really careful. I'm not saying, oh, you got to listen to Christian music. Because Christian music oftentimes, A, sucks. B, it's really just secular music that has been Christianized with a bunch of like words and like feelings to like manipulate you to sell songs. But his point is, there is something about music, and I think, in other words, in the music you're listening to, there's certain music when you hear it, you're like, man, that is true. And there are some great secular artists that say some really true things. Now, there are some great secular artists that also say some really stupid, dumbass shit, okay? And you're like, if you actually did what they're talking about, there's a country song, Tequila Makes Her Clothes Fall Off. I'm all in favor of that for Marilyn, but you know, like, she's like, no, that's not a good idea. Yet my point is, in general, don't try to live life by country songs. It won't go well. It might make for more good songs, but don't do that. The point is, are you actually seeking and singing and listening to music that's like true and beautiful and good and maybe describes the brokenness but also has some genuine hope for healing? Wherever you find that, you need to be looking for that. And he's saying we actually need to be thinking about how music, it's not just incidental background noise. It actually shapes our hearts. And I think if we start to look at the music that we consume and start to think, what if I'm a little more deliberate and intentional? I'm not saying you can't have music on as background. But do you see what I'm getting at? He's saying, what are we singing to ourselves all the time? We need to actually think about that. Okay, what are you rejoicing in? What is your heart crying out to or for? The music you listen to is often a remarkable indicator about where your heart is at. And music can also be a really helpful redirector of your heart. But there's going to have to be a Godward dimension. And there's going to have to be some really tough, hard stuff about what life is like. Jason Isbell, Rebecca gave me this record. What's it called, Marilyn? Just forgot it. It's this really famous record. Okay. It's fantastic. And you listen to this guy and you're like, man, this guy's really broken. But he's singing about his brokenness, and not in a way that makes you, gee, I want to go be broken like this. You're like, no, I actually want redemption. I know and he wants it too. Okay. Paul is saying that music actually plays an important role. So just think about that. We have so much access to music. Too much, probably. But that would be something really easy and really practical. How do you get your heart? What is your heart singing? How do you start getting your heart to sing the things of God? That's really what we're after here. Second thing, give thanks. Verse 20, give thanks always. He is not saying here that you have to be happy all the time, okay? But he is saying that we should be grateful all the time. Again, what's the narrative of your heart? What's the storyline of your prayers? Is it gratitude or is it grumbling? Okay? What are you grateful? Do you talk about that? Like, listen to yourself. Do you actually articulate gratitude? Or is it mostly, here's what's wrong with this, here's what's wrong with that, Here's what's wrong with you. Here's what's wrong with me. Okay? What's very interesting here is Paul says, be grateful for everything. Not just the stuff that goes the way you want. Paul sees and believes in a God who is in control of everything, and that means he can thank him for everything. So think about this. Paul looks at his past, full of shame, full of regret. He actually persecuted God's people and caused people to be put to death. It would be so easy to just be dominated by that. Instead, he actually sees that as a testimony of God's mercy and grace, and he's thankful for it. He wouldn't choose it again, but he's thankful that it happened. He looks at his present. You read Philippians, when he's in chains, and he actually sees, instead of being complaining, he's like, this is an opportunity for the gospel to go forward. He looks future and sees his own death. He says, I'm being poured out by a drink offering, or as a drink offering. And he rejoices in, do you see what I'm saying? When you read Paul, he's constantly giving thanks for everyone. He's just really, really grateful. Now, this doesn't mean that he doesn't struggle. Okay? 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 9 says, we were so utterly burdened that we despaired of life itself. And then he goes, but this was actually to make us to rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises us from the dead. Do you hear the optimism in that? Listen, it is very difficult to practice gratitude and remain pessimistic or negative. Somebody who puts on gratitude deeply is just always hopeful, optimistic, and encouraged, and they have a remarkable capacity to keep going. Okay, so practically, music. What's the melody that you're singing to yourself? Gratitude. What do your prayers look like? Are you just thankful to God? Being grateful has been remarkable in my own communication with God. Like, I start with gratitude, and it's amazing how, like, lines of communication just open up. All right? Third thing, verse 21, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now listen, this is such a big thing that Paul is going to spend the next 20 verses on it. So we're going to spend at least a week or two just talking about submission. All right, that's coming next week. But what I want you to see right now is most of us go through life not seeking submission, we seek mastery and control. We want to be in control of our lives, control of our situation, okay? That's why we put so much money into retirement. It's like we focus on savings, okay? Because what we really trust in, okay, we may put in God, we trust in our money, but what we really trust in is the money, all right? And if I've got lots of it, I feel pretty good. Okay, Paul says the secret is not mastery, it's not control. It's actually learning how to submit. It's so important. He spends the next 20 verses on it. It is so countercultural to American thinking. This is why it's so important to think more like first century Christians, to learn to think more like first century Christians. Listen, ask yourself this question. Is it any coincidence that Christianity exploded from nothing into a world religion in less than 300 years? And do you know who the primary early first converts were? Women, poor, slaves. Now listen, all three of those categories, is it a coincidence that all of them have been forced into submission already? Is there something about submission and learning that as a spiritual practice that actually makes us more receptive to the gospel and more in tune with God and Jesus? And you think about Americans with our desire for control and our desire for consumerism and go, is it any wonder why God seems far and distant? Okay? All I'm saying here, and we'll talk about this more over the next couple of weeks, is that submission finding places where you're like, you know what, I'm actually going to submit to things. It's like eating vegetables. It's really good for you. Okay? 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be a bad thing. All right? You might not enjoy it, but it's probably good. Listen, for most of us, when we're forced to submit, what happens to the song in your heart? Angry. Okay? What happens to the gratitude in your prayers? Okay, it goes away. What if submission is actually a spiritual secret to be cultivated? I guarantee you, when people come to these passages, especially when he says, wives, submit to your husbands, we don't read it that way. We read it like, Paul is such an ignorant, chauvinist. We're starting with the presupposition that submission is bad. Okay? Now, it's way more nuanced than that. But I'm just getting at this, like, the gospel and the New Testament actually assumes that one of the biggest things every Christian needs to do is learn to submit. So where are you submitting in your life? So these are the 3 big focuses. Say it again. Time, purpose, fuel. These are the 3 practical spiritual disciplines, if you want to call that, strategies. Sing, gratitude, submission. Okay, the last point, very quickly. 1 or 2 things you don't want to forget. First of all of this happens where? In church. Do you notice the together language through this? Okay? Addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Like, the point is, this thing happens in the context of a church. You are never going to work out your purposes and those strategies just you and Jesus all by your lonesome. It's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen ideally. A wise person realizes that he or she needs fellow pilgrims. Life together, Bonhoeffer. It's not enough just to be around other Christians. You need to let other Christians into your life. So that's the first thing. How transparent are you? How much do you let people in? Second thing, all of this happens under Christ. Look back up at verse 14. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead. Wake up. Rise from the dead. Christ will shine on you. The image here is of Jesus like a spotlight in a theater. Okay? And everything all around, the entire theater, mostly darkness. But the closer you get to where that spotlight, Jesus is the spotlight. And the closer you get, imagine a spotlight that's like hanging down right over the stage, but it kind of moves around. The closer you get to that spotlight, the more you're going to see. Now, a few steps away, it may be really dark. You may not be sure, but the point is, the image is, as we seek to do this, what we have to do, don't ever lose sight of the fact that, oh man, what I really need to do is keep seeking, following, and pursuing Jesus. He's the source. Every time he moves, I need to keep trying to follow him. And even though I only have a little illumination, it's more than enough to take a few more steps. And you can trust that if you pursue Jesus, these other things are going to work themselves out over time. All right? Let me pray for us.